Picture a mountain south of Tehran, near the holy city of Qum. From the outside, it looks like nothing. Bare rock, a few access roads, a perimeter fence, but underneath that mountain sits one of the most fortified pieces of industrial infrastructure on Earth. This is Fordow, and for more than 15 years, this single site has shaped the way the world thinks about Iran's nuclear ambitions. Here's the strange part. Fordow was never supposed to exist publicly. It was built in secret, discovered by Western intelligence, and only revealed in 2009 when Western leaders went public with what their satellites had found. Since then, it has become something close to a symbol, not just of centrifuges and uranium, but of how far a country will go to protect a program it considers untouchable. So, why does a facility buried inside a mountain still dominate headlines in 2026, years after it was supposedly destroyed? That's the question this story is going to answer, and the answer is more complicated than it was bombed or it was saved. The truth sits somewhere in the space between confirmed fact and unresolved mystery. Fordow began, according to public reporting, as part of a covert Iranian program known as the Ahmad Plan, active in the early 2000s. Analysts describe it as a deeply buried enrichment site designed to take lower enriched uranium from Iran's larger Natanz plant and push it further, potentially even to weapon grade. Construction continued even after the Ahmad Plan was formally shut down in 2003. Western intelligence eventually located the site, and in 2009, Iran's government was confronted with the discovery before it could be revealed by outside powers. Picture that moment. A country suddenly having to explain to the entire international community why it had spent years quietly excavating a mountain. From that point forward, Fordow was never treated like an ordinary facility. It was treated like a test of intentions. The geography explains almost everything that follows. Fordow sits beneath roughly 80 meters of solid rock. Natanz, Iran's larger enrichment site, sits mostly underground too, but shallower and far more exposed. That difference in depth isn't an accident. According to independent nuclear researchers, Fordow was designed as a survival facility, a place meant to keep enriching uranium even if Natanz were destroyed in some future war. It was insurance, buried in stone, built by a country that assumed, correctly as it turned out, that its nuclear program would eventually come under direct military attack. That single design decision, building deep rather than building big, is why this story keeps circling back to one mountain instead of a dozen scattered facilities. Destroy an above-ground plant, and you've destroyed a building. Try to destroy Fordow, and you're negotiating with geology itself. For over a decade, Fordow operated under a patchwork of international agreements, most notably the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Under that deal, Iran was barred from enriching uranium at Fordow at all for 15 years, while separate limits capped enrichment elsewhere at low civilian levels. The site sat in a kind of limbo, present, watched, mostly quiet. That changed in 2018, when the United States withdrew from the deal. Iran gradually breached the agreement's limits and invested in new nuclear capabilities, advances that analysts say brought the country closer to the threshold of nuclear weapons capability. Fordow, once dormant, came back into active use. There's another layer that rarely makes headlines. Starting in February 2021, Iran stopped implementing the more intrusive verification measures it had previously accepted, including daily inspector access to Natanz and Fordow and continuous camera surveillance of sensitive equipment. Arms control researchers have pointed out that this wasn't a small bureaucratic shift. The outside world's ability to track, in real time, what was happening inside these mountains had already been eroding for years before a single bomb was dropped in 2025. The war didn't create the fog around Fordow. It thickened fog that was already there. By early 2025, according to IAEA reporting, Iran had shifted its enrichment strategy at Fordow, feeding higher percentage material into its centrifuges and dramatically increasing monthly output of uranium enriched to 60%, a level far above what civilian reactors require and dangerously close to weapons grade. Getting from natural uranium to 20% enrichment is the hardest part of the journey. Getting from 60 to 90 is comparatively short. By mid-May 2025, inspectors estimated Iran's stockpile of 60% enriched uranium had reached roughly 400 kilograms. Nuclear analysts calculated that this stockpile, if further enriched, could theoretically provide enough weapon-grade material for around 9 nuclear weapons, and that Fordow alone could produce its first batch of weapon-grade uranium in as little as 2 to 3 days once a decision was made. That is not a claim of intent. It is a technical capability estimate. But it's the kind of number that reshapes a region's calculus. By June 2025, patience among Iran's regional rivals had visibly run out. On June 13, 2025, Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, a large-scale military campaign against Iran, striking multiple nuclear and military sites. This became the opening of what is now called the 12-Day War. For over a week, Israeli strikes hit facilities across Iran, including parts of the Natanz complex. But Fordow, buried under 80 meters of rock and reinforced concrete, remained largely untouched. The IAEA stated on June 16 that no visible damage had occurred at Fordow. Even by June 17, the agency could only say the underground facility may have been penetrated during the earlier Natanz-focused strikes. Fordow's entire design purpose, built to defeat conventional weapons, appeared to be working. But Israel didn't have the one weapon capable of reaching that deep. The United States did. On June 21 and into June 22, the United States carried out Operation Midnight Hammer. B-2 Spirit stealth bombers dropped 14 GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, so-called bunker busters, on Fordow and Natanz, while a U.S. Navy submarine fired Tomahawk cruise missiles at the Isfahan nuclear site. American stealth fighters entered Iranian airspace as a diversion, though no surface-to-air missiles were detected in response. It was the most significant American military strike inside Iranian territory in decades. Imagine the scene from above. A B-2, invisible to radar, flying for hours across oceans and continents, carrying bombs the size of small vehicles, each one designed to punch through rock before detonating. 12 of those bombs, according to later analysis, were aimed specifically at Fordow. President Trump declared in the hours after the strike that the operation had completely and totally obliterated Iran's key enrichment facilities. It was a bold, definitive claim, and almost immediately the available evidence complicated it. Satellite imagery obtained by independent researchers in the days that followed showed something specific. Analysts identified precise cratering above what appeared to be a ventilation shaft connecting the surface to Fordow's underground centrifuge halls, suggesting the bombing run had targeted a known point of structural vulnerability rather than attempting to crush the entire mountain. This wasn't blunt force demolition. It looked more like a surgical attempt to sever the facility's lungs, its air and power systems, rather than obliterate the whole structure. That distinction matters enormously. A centrifuge hall with its ventilation destroyed isn't necessarily rubble. It may simply be unusable. Here's where competing interpretations begin. An early classified assessment from the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency suggested the strikes had damaged the sites, but likely set Iran's program back by only months, not years, and that core components had not been destroyed. The White House rejected that conclusion outright. The Pentagon's own spokesman later told reporters the department's formal battle damage assessment estimated Iran's program had been set back by 1 to 2 years, closer to 2. Meanwhile, the directors of national intelligence and the CIA both stated that newly obtained intelligence showed severe damage at Natanz, Fordow, and Isfahan that would require years to repair. 3 different assessments. Months. 1 to 2 years. Years. All from within the same government in the same weeks. That's not dishonesty. It's a sign of just how difficult it is to know what happened inside a mountain you cannot walk into. Rafael Grossi, Director General of the IAEA, offered perhaps the most carefully hedged assessment of all. He described the damage across the sites as severe, but explicitly stopped short of calling it total. Weeks earlier, Grossi said it was clear Fordow had been directly impacted, but the degree of damage inside the enrichment halls could not be determined with certainty. Could not be determined with certainty. That sentence, more than any political statement from Washington or Tehran, may be the most accurate summary of where the story stood in the summer of 2025. Now, picture something else. Not a bomb crater, but a truck. This is layer 2 of the story, and it may end up mattering more than the bombs themselves. Iran's stockpile of 60% enriched uranium, based on IAEA estimates from mid-May 2025, stood at over 400 kilograms. Where was that material physically located on the day the bombs fell? A U.S. defense official told reporters no intelligence reviewed suggested the material had been moved from where it was supposed to be. But that assumption would soon come under serious challenge. Months later, independent analysts began examining satellite imagery from the days just before the strikes. An analysis published by the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists pointed to imagery from June 9th, showing activity consistent with vehicles moving material toward the tunnel complex at Isfahan, raising the possibility that some or much of Iran's highly enriched uranium had already been relocated before the bombs ever fell. If true, the vaults at Fordow and Natanz may have already been empty when the massive ordnance penetrators struck. You can destroy a building. It's much harder to destroy uncertainty about where the contents of that building went. By early 2026, the picture sharpened slightly, though it never fully resolved. Grossi stated publicly that just over 200 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium was likely stored underground at Isfahan alone, enough, if further enriched, for roughly 5 nuclear warheads. As for the rest, Grossi suggested the remaining material at Natanz and Fordow most probably had stayed in place and was probably destroyed in the June strikes, though he could not confirm this with certainty. Probably destroyed. Probably still there. Those two probablys are doing an enormous amount of work in a story this consequential, and nobody can simply walk in and check. After the June war ended with a ceasefire, IAEA inspectors were not permitted to conduct any physical inspections of the affected sites, a gap that stretched on for months. Then Iran formally ended cooperation with the agency's verification activities after February 28, 2026. Think about what that means practically. The organization whose entire job is to answer the question, where is the uranium and is it safe, was locked out of the answer. Estimates are not verification, and the difference between those two words is precisely where global anxiety about Iran's program now lives. The war did not end cleanly in June 2025. According to later reporting, a second period of strikes on Iranian nuclear-adjacent sites occurred between February and April 2026, hitting facilities connected to Iran's broader nuclear infrastructure, including a laser enrichment facility at Lashkar Abad that had previously been used for undeclared enrichment work. This was never a single event with a clean before and after. It has been an unfolding, multi-phase confrontation, with Fordow sitting at its symbolic and physical center throughout. Let's step back and understand, in plain terms, why this mountain matters so much more than any ordinary industrial site. Uranium enrichment relies on centrifuges, machines that spin at extraordinary speeds to separate the useful isotope of uranium from the rest. These machines are delicate. They rely on precise power supplies, cooling systems, and above all, ventilation. Bury that machinery under a mountain, and you gain protection from almost any conventional weapon on Earth. But you also create a fragile dependency. Cut the power. Damage the ventilation shaft. Disrupt the cooling. Even without a direct hit, the machines can be destroyed by vibration, by loss of climate control, or simply by the facility becoming inoperable long enough for the spinning rotors to fail. This is the technical bet the United States and Israel appear to have made in June 2025. The strikes at Fordow were not necessarily designed to obliterate the mountain itself, since doing so with conventional bombs may have been physically impossible, but to sever the systems the facility needs to keep running. If that bet paid off, Fordow doesn't need to be flattened to be finished. It just needs to be broken in the right places. But that assumption depends on something nobody can currently verify from the outside. Exactly how much backup capacity, redundancy, or hidden repair capability Iran built into the site over more than a decade of secretive construction. By the fall of 2025, independent satellite analysis began offering the clearest public look yet at the aftermath. Imagery reviewed in November 2025 showed little to no significant new activity at Fordow, describing the site as relatively dormant since Iran had conducted what appeared to be its own damage assessments back in late July. The tunnel portal entrances at Fordow remained backfilled with soil, and the craters left by the bunker buster strikes had themselves been filled in, as if the site were being sealed rather than repaired. Picture that image. Not reconstruction, not defiant rebuilding, just soil, quietly filling in the wounds, with no clear sign of which side did the filling or why. Independent nuclear researchers have offered a broader technical judgment. One assessment concluded that the June 2025 strikes likely destroyed or rendered inoperable nearly all of Iran's installed gas centrifuges across its enrichment sites, and that for the first time in 20 years, Iran had no identifiable route to directly produce weapon-grade uranium using its existing centrifuge infrastructure. If accurate, the machinery pathway to a bomb has genuinely been closed, at least for now, even if the raw material itself remains unaccounted for. But notice the qualifier. No identifiable route using existing infrastructure. It says nothing about hidden infrastructure, and this is where the story's deepest uncertainty lives. For years before the war, IAEA reporting had already flagged concerns about facilities the agency could not fully see into. Since February 2021, the agency had lost the ability to verify centrifuge manufacturing inside Iran altogether, and inspectors have noted it remains entirely plausible that Iran could have built additional centrifuge cascades in undeclared locations. One location researchers have specifically flagged without confirmation is a facility referred to publicly as Pickaxe Mountain, near Natanz, whose exact purpose and contents remain undetermined in publicly available IAEA reporting. So here are the two competing interpretations laid out plainly. The first, Fordow, and Iran's centrifuge-based enrichment program as a whole, has been functionally dismantled. The physical machinery needed to convert stockpiled material into weapon-grade uranium has been destroyed. Even if raw material survives somewhere, Iran currently lacks the industrial means to weaponize it quickly. Under this view, the strikes achieved their strategic purpose, even if the political rhetoric around them was overstated. The second, this is a pause, not an ending. Iran retains significant stockpiles of near-weapons-grade material whose exact location remains unconfirmed. Iran has ended cooperation with international inspectors. And Iran's demonstrated ability to rebuild covertly once already, the entire reason Fordow existed in secret for years before its discovery, suggests the country retains both the expertise and the motivation to reconstitute a program using undeclared infrastructure the world has not yet found. Both interpretations rely on real evidence. Neither can currently be proven beyond reasonable doubt. That, uncomfortable as it sounds, is the honest state of the public record as of the middle of 2026. Fordow doesn't exist in isolation. During the broader conflict, strikes also hit Iran's heavy water production plant at Kondab, which the IAEA noted contained no declared nuclear material but was severely damaged and rendered non-operational. The IAEA also reported incidents striking close to the premises of Bushehr, Iran's only functioning nuclear power plant, on multiple occasions, prompting Grossi to publicly call for adherence to 7 core pillars meant to protect nuclear safety during active conflict. Why does that matter for a story about Fordow? Because it shows the stakes extend beyond enrichment and weapons potential. An active nuclear power reactor sitting inside a war zone introduces an entirely separate risk, the risk of radioactive contamination, regardless of anyone's intentions. Isfahan deserves its own mention here because it has quietly become just as important to this story as Fordow itself. Unlike Fordow, Isfahan wasn't primarily an enrichment site. It's a sprawling complex where uranium gets converted, processed, and turned into different chemical and metallic forms. But independent analysis increasingly suggests Isfahan's underground tunnel network may now be the single largest storage point for Iran's most sensitive material. If that assessment holds, then the mountain everyone has been watching for over a decade might not even be the most important one anymore. The story may have quietly shifted, sometime around June 2025, to a different set of tunnels entirely. Fordow captured the world's imagination because it was the first hidden site ever discovered, the symbol of secrecy itself. But symbols and substance don't always occupy the same location. Here's a detail that puts the entire verification problem into focus. The last confirmed physical visit by an IAEA Director General to both Natanz and Fordow took place on November 15, 2024, months before the war began. Everything the agency has said publicly since, every kilogram estimate, every claim about where material might be sitting, has been built from a combination of Iran's own declarations, intelligence shared by member states, and commercial satellite photography. Picture an inspector who hasn't been allowed to open a single door in over a year, still being asked by the entire world to say with confidence what's behind it. That's the position Rafael Grossi has occupied for most of this story, and it's a position that makes hedged language, not certainty, the only honest kind of language available. Now consider the diplomatic thread running underneath all of this. In March 2026, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi told American media that Iran was prepared to dilute, or downblend, its enriched material into a lower, less dangerous concentration, describing it as a significant concession Iran had already offered. Around the same time, Araghchi stated Iran had no plans to retrieve its stockpile of highly enriched uranium from Isfahan, pushing back on suggestions from Washington that a retrieval or seizure operation might be necessary. An offer to dilute material is not the same as actually doing it, and a statement of no plans to retrieve material is not verifiable without inspectors physically present. Analysts have pointed out that Iran's willingness to even discuss downblending under IAEA supervision would be extremely valuable and well worth pursuing diplomatically, precisely because it would resolve the single largest unanswered question in this entire story: where the material is and what happens to it next. Meanwhile, according to reporting from early 2026, the American government was reportedly considering options well beyond diplomacy. Multiple diplomatic officials described the Trump administration weighing the deployment of special forces on the ground to locate and secure Iran's near-bomb-grade uranium stockpile, driven by growing concern the material may have already been relocated beyond reach. Independent defense analysts stressed just how difficult that would be. Securing hidden nuclear material inside hostile, mountainous, heavily defended terrain would rank among the most operationally complex missions in modern military history. Picture what that would actually require. Not a single airstrike executed in hours, but a sustained ground presence inside a country that had just experienced the most significant attack on its sovereign territory in decades, searching for material small enough to fit inside a truck, hidden somewhere within a landscape built, quite deliberately, to be impossible to search from above. This is the layer airstrikes alone cannot resolve. You can destroy a building. You cannot, with a bomb, guarantee the destruction of something you cannot locate. And this single fact, the unresolved location of hundreds of kilograms of near-weapons-grade material, is arguably the most important open question left in the entire Fordow story. There are really two separate problems bundled together in every conversation about Fordow. The first is infrastructure. Can Iran physically enrich uranium right now? The second is material. Does Iran currently possess uranium that is already most of the way to weapons grade? These are different questions with different answers. On infrastructure, the evidence increasingly suggests significant, possibly severe, damage to declared centrifuge capacity. On material, the evidence suggests genuine uncertainty about location, but strong indications that a substantial stockpile of 60% enriched uranium still exists somewhere inside Iranian territory, most likely split between Isfahan, Natanz, and Fordow itself. There's a third factor that rarely gets discussed but matters just as much: expertise. Centrifuges are machines. Machines can be rebuilt, eventually, given enough time, money, and access to specialized parts. What's much harder to destroy is the knowledge inside the heads of the scientists and engineers who spent 2 decades learning how to design, manufacture, and operate this equipment. Some of those individuals were reportedly killed during the campaign. Others remain. Analysts who study nuclear proliferation have argued that military force can set back a program's machinery, but it struggles to erase institutional memory, and it can sometimes harden the political will behind a program rather than ending it. Even in the most optimistic scenario, rebuilding a centrifuge hall inside a mountain isn't like repairing a factory. It requires re-excavating collapsed sections, restoring ventilation precise enough to keep thousands of spinning rotors stable, and manufacturing new centrifuge components without the ability to import specialized parts under heavy sanctions. Some estimates from defense officials suggested reconstruction could take 1 to 2 years under normal conditions. Whether Iran would attempt it openly, quietly, or at some entirely new and undisclosed location is a question no satellite image can answer by itself. Put those findings together, and you get the uneasy conclusion shared by many independent nuclear analysts as of mid-2026. The pathway to producing new weapon-grade material through Iran's known declared infrastructure appears substantially blocked. But the raw ingredients for multiple weapons, if they still exist, and if Iran ever chose to rebuild even limited enrichment capacity elsewhere, have not been accounted for, verified, or eliminated. That's not obliteration, and it's not business as usual. It's something in between. State nuclear policy researchers have started describing less as an ending and more as an unresolved standoff, frozen in place by military force but never actually settled through verification or agreement. Fordow was built to survive exactly this kind of moment, buried deep enough that even a direct hit leaves room for doubt about what actually happened inside. It succeeded, in a sense, at that singular design goal. Even the most powerful bunker-buster bombs in the American arsenal could not produce a damage assessment anyone fully agrees on. And that ambiguity may be exactly the outcome that suits every side, at least for now. Washington gets to claim a historic strike. Israel gets to claim a program was set back. Iran gets to claim its facilities and its material survived, without ever having to prove it. And the IAEA is left holding the one job nobody currently lets it finish: verification. Every neighboring government, from the Gulf states to Turkey to Israel itself, now has to plan its own security posture around a program whose true status nobody can confirm. Deterrence built on certainty is one kind of stability. Deterrence built on ambiguity is something else entirely, a much more fragile arrangement, prone to miscalculation precisely because nobody, including the people making decisions in Tehran, Washington, and Tel Aviv, can say with full confidence what the other side actually has left. The unresolved question at the center of all of this isn't really about bombs or bunkers or even centrifuges. It's about whether a program this deeply hidden, this deliberately built to defeat inspection from the very beginning, can ever truly be confirmed as finished by anyone standing on the outside. Until inspectors walk back through those tunnel entrances and physically account for every kilogram of material that existed before June 2025, the honest answer to what remains inside Fordow is the same answer the world has been giving since 2009. Nobody outside that mountain can say for certain.